Good evening, everybody. Tonight I'd like to talk to you about a couple of those basic definitions that I posted a while back that I'd be addressing. And these are for political science. Now, I teach both American government and a course on political parties and interest groups at American Public University System. So I'd like to go over a couple of the basic definitions of political parties and interest groups because sometimes they do get confused. They're very different as far as their objectives go. A political party is an organization dedicated to putting its members into elected office. That purpose defines it. It puts members into elected office. And for this, political party will solicit donations. It will organize volunteers and staffs for campaigns. It will recruit candidates. But that essential mission of putting people into office is the thing that really sets it apart from everything else, including interest groups. Now, political parties will sometimes say that they want a moral victory or that they exercise influence beyond the ability to get anyone into office. This is misleading, and I think they do it on purpose to obscure the fact that they don't do as well as they should or they want to at that essential mission of electing candidates. And it's a problem that has affected third parties in the United States, that they try to influence events that will sometimes recruit good candidates and nominate good ones, but they just can't get anyone into office because the Republicans and the Democrats have that completely locked up. They have a duopoly that is almost impossible to break. For example, the Reform Party, started by H. Ross Perot, went at it great guns when he ran for president with Admiral Jim Stockdale as his running mate. They didn't win any electoral votes. And although they were in effect a spoiler that deprived George H.W. Bush of re-election and helped get Bill Clinton elected, as a national political party, they were a failure. The only success they had really was getting Jesse Ventura to run under their banner for governor of Minnesota, and he did win. But even there, you could say that the party was secondary. With Ventura, they had larger-than-life, over-the-top, readily identifiable character who proved to be an effective candidate. He had been mayor of Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. He did have some political experience, but he was far better known as an actor, especially with Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator, with the famous line, "Ain't got time to bleed," which became the title of one of his books. Ventura was also a professional wrestler, and he was a Navy SEAL veteran. He went in as an underwater demolition team member, and they were absorbed into the SEAL community. So some people will try to parse it, and my verdict basically is that yes, Jesse Ventura was a SEAL. And it's probably the one thing that he does not talk about very much. He was a member of the organization. He was part of that community. But he respects the secrecy and the discretion needed for what he did during the Vietnam years. This is what political parties do. They find candidates, they recruit them, and they support them to try to get into office. This is the only metric of their success, the only one that really matters. Interest groups, on the other hand, have a different mission. They are organizations whose mission is to achieve positive policy outcomes. Whoever is in office matters far, far less than achieving their policy programs. We can see it with labor unions, that they want to see legislation that benefits big labor, that benefits their organizations and their members. The United States Chamber of Commerce wants policy outcomes that favor business, especially big business, putting them at odds with big labor. The National Rifle Association has its mission as impeding gun control and asserting people's rights to, under the Second Amendment, to keep and bear arms. These are very specific. That's a very specific policy outcome. Others can be more general. AARP purports to represent older people. Whether it's all older people or not, that's up to you. But this is whom they claim to advocate for. Now, their interest is not putting people into office. Leave that to the political parties. It's secondary, if it's even on the radar, who gets elected. However, they do tend to have symbiotic relationships with parties. Part of it is ideological compatibility. Some of it, too, is, I'd say most of it is a symbiotic relationship, that one benefits the other. For example, with the National Rifle Association, we see them assisting Republican candidates. We see them working against, in most cases, Democratic candidates. This is with the idea that Republicans will be more likely to protect the Second Amendment and impede the enactment of gun control. Teachers' unions tend to support the Democratic Party with money and time and people in order to help Democrats get elected to state, local, and national office. Their mission to represent and advocate for the interests of their members, teachers, is compatible with that of the Democratic Party. And they have a convergence of interests, and one benefits the other. Just don't ever get these two confused. A political party is just there to help people get elected. It measures its success in elections, in successful outcomes. An interest group has the mission of pushing and achieving positive policy outcomes, that is, positive from their point of view. The Brady campaign pushes for gun control. What they see as a positive outcome is not the same as the NRA. That's obvious, but it still needs to be stated. Positive is in the eye of the beholder. Now, too, with interest groups, sometimes they're referred to under other names. Lobbyists. Not lobbyists, if you want to be really technical about it. A lobbyist and a lobbying firm are professional advocates for interest groups, which is, if you define interest groups very broadly, this can even include foreign countries looking out for their interests in the halls of Congress. Lobbyists are more like hired guns. They are often attorneys, which is why the compound word, lawyer-lobbyist, is frequently used. There are a lot of times where a law firm will do lobbying business. They will hire people who are salesmen for interest groups to advocate for them in the halls of Congress and state legislatures especially. Now, a lobbyist doesn't always have to believe in what he's advocating for, any more than a lawyer has to be a true believer in his client. I remember the late Pittsburgh attorney Jim Ecker, very, very effective criminal defense attorney, talk show host asked him one time, Jim, do you believe in the innocence of all the people you represent? And he said that he represented them to the best of his ability, but he didn't want some of them to know where he lived. No matter what you see on TV, there's an awful lot of that, where even the guilty, and especially the guilty, have the right to effective legal counsel. In the lobbying firm, a lobbyist does not have to be a true believer in his client. Whatever interest group or foreign country he represents, he doesn't really have to sign on to their program, but he has to advocate for it and represent it to the best of his ability within ethical bounds. So lobbyists, I would separate them from interest groups. Interest groups are the people who hire lobbyists. Lobbyists do their work in the halls of Congress and state legislatures especially, sometimes in the bureaucracy, sometimes at local government. But they are the agents, the hired guns, call them mercenaries if you will, the legal counsel to the interest groups. Now, interest groups, when I was growing up, were sometimes called special interest groups. Like, their interests are special, and nobody, they're trying to get an edge on everybody. It's like the factions that were dealt with in the Federalist Papers by Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay, that a faction is a group that tries to get an advantage within government at the expense of the body politic as a whole. They want a special break, and this sometimes does hold. When you talk about a special interest, it really pushes the semantics towards that level of faction. And there's also another term for it that I have seen in the British media. They sometimes call them pressure groups, which really defines their mission as trying to exert pressure on elected officials, in their case, generally members of the House of Commons, to achieve policy goals. So there too, you can sometimes have a little bit of not just symbiosis, but I think in Britain it can be even closer, that the Labour Party was officially formed as the agents of trade unions and of British socialists. If you go way back to their roots, these are the two constituencies who formed them. Now, Labour will have the mission of trying to put people into elected seats as councillors at the local level in the devolved parliaments in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, as well as Westminster. But they are, at the same time, they have a fuzzier border with interest groups because their mission is to represent organized labor in the United Kingdom. And they do tend to shift to the left, reflecting their socialist roots, and the fact that their main rivals to date have been the Conservative Party. Although recently, I would say now they're both faced with an existential competitor in the form of the UK Reform Party under Nigel Farage. But here you see a little bit of a more dynamic and flexible borderline with Labour between political parties and interest groups. I would say it's more of a political party, but there is that element of interest group in there as the representatives of big Labour historically in the United Kingdom. So, to keep them straight, and especially an American environment, political parties are there to get elected asses into elected office. Get them into that seat. Put asses into seats. Easy enough to remember. Interest groups are there to achieve policy outcomes. Executive orders, legislation, maybe even a constitutional amendment. The National Organization of Women has certainly been a energetic advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment through its whole life cycle. The NAACP advocated for African Americans very, very effectively, including in the courts. Again, this blurs that line between interest group and lawyer lobbyists. They would hire the attorneys to represent people in racially charged cases like Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. Their chief counsel, who argued before the Supreme Court, was Thurgood Marshall, who was eminent enough that he became an associate justice of the Supreme Court. That the lawyer lobbyists can work through the courts, putting on their lawyer hat. But it all involves that positive policy outcome. And Brown v. Board, by the way, you could see that as one that was sort of divorced from policy or divorced from party. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who really pushed that decision through and was able to convince all 8 of his colleagues to sign on to it without any dissent, no nay votes, no dissenting opinions, not even a concurring opinion, was Earl Warren, former Republican governor of California, former California Attorney General, and in 1948, the Republican nominee for vice president alongside New York Governor Thomas Dewey. Here's a Republican who pushes through the landmark legal decision to achieve a policy goal that is usually associated with the NAACP as an interest group and sometimes Democrats as a party. So there the outcome is, you could say it's independent of party. And this is the way that interest groups work. Usually it's through the legislative branch and the federal government, state legislatures. You could see it sometimes in county and municipal government. And occasionally they work through the courts. They're lawyers. So just try to keep those two straight, because this is really, really important. Now, I put this together largely for my Political Science 311 course, Political Parties and Interest Groups at American Public University System, but it's applicable everywhere. To any political science course, I think constitutional law, history, and just being a good citizen, keeping the terminology straight. I think that this is important. So, with that in mind, I'd like to sign off and thank you for your time. Please like and subscribe, and of course, share with your friends. If you're an instructor, you're a teacher, you're a professor, by all means, feel free to use this in the classroom. Assign it to your students if you want. That's part of the intent. Pass it around. I'm happy to if you can do that. And of course, feel free to keep this going. Subscribe to my channel. And I will see you probably in a few days. Thanks again for your time.